The November sunset spilled across the South Boston waterfront, staining the abandoned warehouses in amber washed through with a cold, steely gray. Leah Bennett sat hunched on a cracked concrete step outside an old textile mill, the makeshift shelter she'd clung to for the past 3 weeks. Her pale blue scrubs, the nurse's uniform that had once made her feel proud, were now faded, torn at the shoulder, and hanging loose on a frame so frighteningly thin it looked unreal. She was 28, yet Leah Bennett seemed both youthful in a way that belonged to her early 20s and worn down in a way that belonged to someone past 40. Her brown hair was a tangled mess, her face dulled by dust and exhaustion, but her gray-green eyes still held a stubborn glimmer that 3 months on the streets hadn't managed to snuff out. She used to be a pediatric nurse. She had a studio apartment with a view of the Charles River, an old Honda that still ran well, and a life that felt full in all the ways that mattered. Then her mother's early Alzheimer's hit when her mother was only 54, forcing Leah to quit and become a full-time caregiver. Nursing home bills piled up, her savings evaporated, and then her mother died 5 months ago, leaving behind a debt of $200,000 and a young woman drained in body and spirit. The apartment was seized, her license lapsed because she couldn't afford the renewal, and her credit cards were maxed out to nothing. The collapse happened in 4 months, from someone who healed others to someone who had nothing left to save herself with. Leah was sunk in calculations, weighing whether she should walk 2 miles to St. Mary's Church to ask for a free dinner or conserve the little strength she had left, when her ears caught it. A child's scream, high and raw, desperate and terrified, tore through the cold air of late afternoon. Her nurse's instincts flared like a conditioned reflex. She sprang up before she could think, eyes sweeping for the source, her heart pounding like a drum. And then she saw him, a tiny boy, about 5 years old, clutching a stuffed bear to his chest, frozen in the doorway of a 3-story building half a block away. Thick black smoke roiled behind him, dense enough to choke. Through the second-floor windows, Leah could clearly see savage orange flames devouring the room. The boy stood rigid, sobbing, coughing in harsh bursts, so small and so scared he couldn't step forward or back. Leah Bennett didn't give herself time to think, because thinking meant measuring danger, weighing her own safety, listing a dozen sensible reasons to wait for someone else, anyone else, to handle it. Thinking meant admitting she had nothing left to lose but her life, and the life of a homeless woman seemed, to the world, less valuable than the risk. But that child had everything to lose, so Leah ran. Bare feet, she'd lost her old sneakers 2 days earlier, slapped hard against the icy sidewalk as she sprinted straight toward the burning building. Around her, people began shouting, raising phones to record, calling 911, scattering in panic. But not one of them, not a single person among them, dared move toward the child standing on the threshold of death. Only her, the woman with nothing. The woman people looked past like a ghost on the pavement. Now she was running into hell to save a child she had never even met. What happened when Leah charged into that wall of fire? Did the child survive? And could this nameless woman have imagined that a single second's decision would change the fate of 3 lives, including the most dangerous kingpin in Boston? If you want to know where this deeply moving story goes, please hit like to support the channel, share it with someone you care about, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next part, where the surprises only get bigger. The heat struck Leah Bennett the instant she stepped into the building. Not the familiar warmth of a Boston summer, but a savage, suffocating heat that chewed at every breath inside her chest. Thick black smoke rose like a living wall, burning her eyes and shrinking her vision to just a few feet ahead. Leah pulled the sleeve of her old scrubs over her nose, bent low, and forced herself to breathe through the thin, failing fabric. The nurse inside her began calculating automatically. 4 minutes before smoke could cause brain injury in a child, maybe less if he'd already inhaled a heavy dose. Time wasn't a luxury anymore. It was the enemy. She shouted, her voice swallowed by smoke, asking where he was and if he could hear her. There was no answer. Only the roar of flames somewhere above, the crack of splitting wood, the sharp burst of shattering glass. Leah felt her way down the narrow hallway, one hand sliding along the wall to keep her bearings. The peeling paint was blisteringly hot beneath her palm, but she didn't dare let go. The first room on the left was empty, just overturned plastic chairs and toys scattered across the floor. The second room was empty too. Her heart hammered, her breathing turned ragged, her thoughts blurred from lack of oxygen. She told herself she couldn't stop, that she had to find him. She called out again, her voice raw now, telling him to knock on something if he could hear her, promising she'd find him. A small sound answered. Weak. From the far end of the hallway, Leah lunged toward it, bare feet crunching over broken glass that sliced into her skin, the pain drowned out by adrenaline. The last room on the right had its door half open. Inside, the smoke was thicker, flames already crawling along the adjacent wall, the burning wallpaper releasing a sickening stench that made her gag. She scanned the room and saw a small bed, a drawing table, and a tall wooden wardrobe. A faint, rasping cough came from inside that wardrobe. Leah rushed forward and tore the door open. Leo was curled inside, clutching his stuffed bear, his tiny face streaked with tears and soot. His eyes were wide as he looked at her, his lips tinged blue, his breathing short and desperate. Leah didn't waste a second. The nurse took over completely, 2 fingers to his neck, checking his pulse, fast but weak, thready, her ear to his chest, shallow breaths, a wheeze with each inhale. Smoke inhalation, early stage. There was time, but not much. She told him he was okay now, that she was taking him outside, forcing her voice to sound calm, while panic clawed at her ribs. She lifted him up, and he felt terrifyingly light in her arms, his small body trembling as he clung to her neck, the stuffed bear slipping from his grasp onto the floor. Leah turned back into the hallway, and her heart seemed to stop. The wooden staircase she'd used was gone, collapsed into a smoking heap. Flames from below had eaten through the steps, leaving a blackened pit that couldn't be crossed. She whispered no over and over, as panic began to seep through her focus. Leo coughed in her arms, deep, painful spasms that jolted his fragile body. There was no time to hesitate. Leah turned back into the room, eyes sweeping desperately for another way out. The windows, 2 of them, one already shattered by the heat, the other still intact. She ran to it and smashed it with her elbow, ignoring the glass biting into her skin. She looked down and saw it was only about 6 feet to the ground, with people below, one man standing directly under the window with his arms outstretched, shouting for her to pass the child down. Leah set Leo on the sill and held his hands, telling him he had to jump, that the man would catch him, that he'd be safe. Leo was still coughing, barely able to respond. Leah didn't wait. She guided him out and let go, praying the man would catch him. A shout from below confirmed Leo was safe. Leah let out a breath, but only for a heartbeat. Now it was her turn. She climbed onto the sill, and in that instant a terrifying crack sounded above her. She looked up just in time to see a ceiling beam, weakened by heat and weight, breaking loose. She tried to move faster, but gravity and fate moved faster still. The beam crashed down, slamming into her back and hurling her through the window. She had time for only one thought, that Leo was down there. With her last reflex, Leah twisted in midair, arms spreading instinctively, positioning her body so she'd take the impact if the child was still beneath her. The collision with the ground was more violent than she'd imagined. The concrete sidewalk showed no mercy as her back hit first, the shock ripping through her ribs, her arms, her shoulders, blasting the air from her lungs. The beam followed, crashing onto her, its jagged edge tearing into her shoulder and arm, carving deep gashes. But it landed on Leah, not on Leo. He'd already been carried away, safe. Leah lay there beneath splintered wood and crumbling brick, her whole body screaming, blood flowing from countless small cuts and one deep wound on her forehead. And through the haze of pain and fading awareness, there was only one question in her mind, over and over again, asking if the child was okay. The scream of an ambulance siren tore through the air, drawing closer by the second, and Leah forced herself to sit up even as her body fought every movement. Someone's hand pressed onto her shoulder, a worried voice telling her not to move, that she was badly hurt. Leah shoved the hand away, her eyes sweeping the crowd that had gathered. "The baby," she demanded. "The child. Where was he? Let me see him." Her voice was raw from smoke, each word cutting her throat like a blade. A woman pointed across the street, where the man from before was kneeling beside Leo. He was lying on a blanket someone had brought, still coughing. Leah staggered toward him, and every step was agony, her left ribs protesting with a deep, grinding ache. But she didn't care. When she reached Leo, she dropped to her knees, even as pain flared through her scraped skin. Her shaking hands found his neck and checked his pulse again. Still fast, but steadier now. Better than it had been inside. She lowered her ear to his chest and listened, still wheezing, but not in immediate crisis. He needed oxygen, but he was going to make it. She whispered for him to breathe evenly, slow and steady, telling him he was doing so well, and she stroked his sweat-damp hair. Her hand left a smear of blood on his forehead, but she didn't notice. The paramedics arrived, 3 of them jumping down with their equipment. A tall man in reflective gear moved toward Leah and told her she had to sit down right now, that she was bleeding a lot. Leah shook her head hard enough that her vision swam. "The child first," she said. "He'd inhaled too much smoke and needed oxygen immediately. He could develop pulmonary edema, so check his oxygen saturation." Her voice carried the authority of someone who'd worked emergency care, and the paramedic heard it. He nodded and turned to his partner, ordering oxygen for the boy and a SPO2 reading. While they worked, fitting the oxygen mask over Leo's face and checking his vital signs, Leah stayed kneeling there, her eyes never leaving him. Blood from the cut on her forehead ran down her cheek and dripped onto her torn scrubs, but she didn't move. Only when a female paramedic reported that Leo's oxygen saturation was 86% and rising, his breathing steady, that he was going to be okay, did Leah finally let herself exhale. Then Leo opened his eyes. His pale blue gaze was unfocused at first, drifting, until it settled on Leah. He whispered to her weakly through the oxygen mask, "You saved me." Leah smiled through tears she couldn't stop, telling him he was safe now and that was what mattered. Leo lifted a tiny hand and curled it around Leah's blood-smeared finger. He begged her not to go, not to leave him, terrified that the one person who'd just saved him would vanish the way everything always seemed to vanish in his small life. Leah's heart broke apart. She whispered that he'd be okay, that his parents would be there any moment, and she squeezed his small hand gently before letting go. Now the paramedics turned to her, firm, telling her she had to let them check her, that she could have broken ribs and a concussion from the head wound. Leah let them guide her a little away from Leo and sit her down on the step of the ambulance. They began examining the gash on her forehead, wrapping her hands and legs where the scrapes were worst. But when one of them said they needed to take her to the hospital and she might need x-rays, Leah shook her head. She said she was fine. It was just scratches. The paramedic stared at her like she was out of her mind and told her she could have internal injuries, that this wasn't a joke. But Leah knew exactly what would happen if she climbed into that ambulance. Questions about an address, about insurance, about medical records. They would look at her, a dirty woman with no paperwork, and call social services. Or worse, the police would start asking questions. Leah had lived long enough on the street to know that kindness often came with a price she couldn't afford. She repeated that she was fine, her voice harder now. Around them, the crowd was growing. Police had arrived and were taking notes, questioning witnesses. Someone pointed at Leah and announced that the woman had run into the fire, that she was a hero, and suddenly, too many eyes swung toward her, too much attention. A police officer walked closer and asked for her name, saying they needed it for the statement. Panic surged in Leah's chest. She couldn't stay here. She couldn't answer questions. She couldn't let them look at her like a charity case, like someone who needed saving. Leah Bennett wasn't a victim anymore. She just wanted to disappear. When the paramedic turned away to grab more bandages, when the officer was busy writing down someone else's account, Leah stood up, slowly, silently. She backed into the jostling crowd, craning for a better view, blending into unfamiliar faces. And then, like a ghost, Leah vanished. She moved as fast as her aching body would allow, leaving the scene behind, slipping into a familiar alley. 3 miles later, when her legs could barely keep her upright, Leah found the abandoned textile factory again, and her friend Brooklyn was sitting outside. Her friend jolted to her feet at the sight of Leah's condition, crying out to God and asking what had happened. Leah collapsed onto the steps, her body finally refusing to cooperate any longer. She said only that there was a child, that she'd saved the child, and then everything fell into darkness. Kieran Moretti stood by the window of a warehouse in the North End, his gaze cold, as it tracked the man kneeling on the concrete floor in front of him. Antonio De Luca, a useless middleman who'd dared to steal $50,000 from last week's shipment, was shaking uncontrollably now, begging with a pitiful, sobbing voice. Kieran didn't say a word. He let the silence stretch on, because he knew that sometimes silence was more terrifying than any threat. Tommy O'Brien stood beside Antonio, a Glock resting lightly on his thigh, a wordless reminder of what betrayal cost. "I've got a family, Moretti. I'm begging you," Antonio whispered, tears and sweat mixing on his face. "My kid needs surgery money. I was desperate. I didn't have any other choice. Kieran turned around, his face empty of emotion. We've all got a family, Antonio. That's not a reason to steal. That's a reason not to steal. His voice was low, each word dropping like a death sentence. You've got 24 hours to return that money, with interest. If you don't, Tommy'll pay your family a visit. And I promise you, your kid won't need surgery anymore, because he won't have a father left to worry about. It wasn't an idle threat. Antonio understood. Tommy understood. And the 3 other men standing in the corner understood too. Kieran Moretti didn't joke when it came to family, whether it was his own or someone else's. Right as Antonio was about to bow his head and plead one more time, the phone in Kieran's suit pocket vibrated. He glanced at the screen. Tommy had assigned a special ringtone to one number, and this was the emergency line from Mrs. Chen, the woman who watched Leo. Kieran's brow tightened. Every call involving his son came first, but Mrs. Chen had never called in the middle of the afternoon like this unless something was wrong. He lifted a hand, signaling everyone to be quiet, and answered. Chen, what's going on? His voice was still calm, controlled. Moretti, there's a fire. Mrs. Chen's voice trembled, desperate. At the daycare. Leo's trapped. Someone pulled him out. But you have to come here right now. Kieran Moretti's world, the solid world he'd built out of strength, money, and ruthlessness, collapsed in a single instant. No meeting mattered. No enemy mattered. No empire mattered more than Leo. What's the address? He said through clenched teeth. Mrs. Chen gave it, and Kieran hung up before she could say another word. He turned to Tommy. Handle this. Leo's in danger. No explanation. No waiting for a response. Kieran surged out of the warehouse, and Tommy ran after him, barely making it into the black SUV before it shot forward like a bullet. 15 minutes. That was how long it took Tommy to drive from the North End to South Boston at nearly twice the speed limit, blowing through red lights, siren wailing so other cars would scatter. For those 15 minutes, Kieran sat in the back seat in silence, his hand clenched into a fist, his jaw locked until it ached. He didn't pray, because he'd given up on God a long time ago, but if any kind of divinity existed, Kieran Moretti was ready to sign any bargain in exchange for Leo's safety. When they arrived, smoke still rose from the ruined building, and firefighters were putting out the last stubborn flames. An ambulance was parked at the curb, and in the middle of the chaos, Kieran saw his son. Leo sat on a gurney, an oxygen mask covering his small face, a silver thermal blanket wrapped around his body. Kieran couldn't remember how he pushed through the crowd. He only remembered dropping to his knees in front of Leo, his hands shaking as he pulled him close. Daddy! Leo sobbed, his voice thin behind the mask, his little arms locking around his father's neck. Kieran held him tighter, so tight he was afraid he'd hurt him, and still he couldn't let go. This feeling, the feeling of almost losing his only child, almost losing the only light in his dark world, was a kind of pain no bullet or blade could ever match. You're okay. Daddy's here. Daddy won't let anything happen to you again, Kieran whispered into Leo's hair, now heavy with the smell of smoke, his voice cracking for the first time in years. A paramedic stepped closer. He inhaled quite a bit of smoke, but luckily someone got to him in time. His oxygen saturation is recovering well, but we recommend taking him to the hospital for overnight observation. Kieran nodded, never taking his eyes off Leo. Who saved my son? The paramedic hesitated. A woman, looked homeless. She ran into the building while everyone else was running out. She got the boy out, then disappeared before we could even get her name. Kieran looked up, his eyes sweeping the crowd. Where is she? I need to see her. The paramedic shook his head. She left, sir. She was pretty badly hurt, but she refused the ambulance. We couldn't keep her. Tommy, standing behind Kieran, had already spoken to witnesses. He stepped in, voice low. Boss, people only know she looked extremely thin, wearing worn-out clothes, barefoot. Someone said she usually sleeps around this area. No one knows her name. Kieran stood, still keeping Leo in his arms. Find security footage, every camera within 5 miles. I want to know who she is and where she went. Tommy nodded, understanding. Right now, boss. 2 hours later, after Leo had been taken to the hospital and settled in a private room with a monitor marking his steady heartbeat, Kieran sat beside the bed, his hand gripping his son's small hand as if letting go could tempt the universe to take him again. Tommy came in with a tablet and handed it to Kieran. Footage from the camera across the street. It's not great, but it's all we've got. Kieran watched the grainy video. A slender woman with messy brown hair ran toward the burning building while everyone else ran the other way. Minutes later, the image grew even blurrier, but it showed her at a window, pushing Leo down, then falling to the ground and getting pinned under a pile of debris. And after that, she vanished into the crowd. Kieran replayed it 3 times, unblinking. This woman, nameless, with nothing to lose, had risked her life for a child she'd never met. "Find her," Kieran said, and his voice wasn't the same cold voice he'd used with Antonio. It carried something else. Something set in stone. A resolve that couldn't be moved. Find her no matter what. I don't care how long it takes, how much it costs. Find the person who saved my son. I owe her a life. 4 days. 4 days Kieran Moretti spent doing something he'd never had to do in his life, begging for information from people who weren't afraid enough to give it. On the first day, Tommy hired a sketch artist, someone who interviewed 3 witnesses from the fire scene and produced a composite portrait. A thin woman with messy brown hair, wide eyes, a bony face that looked like it had once been beautiful before life tore it down. The image wasn't very sharp, but it was clear enough that anyone who knew her might recognize her. Kieran held that sketch the way some men held a relic, printed 50 copies, and with Tommy began moving through every corner of South Boston. They went first to St. Mary's, the relief camp where hundreds of unhoused people lined up for a free dinner. Kieran and Tommy, in expensive suits and polished leather shoes, stood out like 2 crows dropped into a flock of pigeons. Kieran approached person after person, holding out the sketch and asking if they knew this woman, what her name was, where she usually stayed. The reactions were almost identical. People looked at the drawing, then looked at Kieran, then shook their heads and walked away. No explanations, no reasons, only a silence packed with suspicion. An older man, weather darkened, his beard gone silver and wild, finally spoke. He asked who Kieran was, police or ICE. Tommy stepped in and said they only wanted to find her to thank her, that she'd saved a child's life. The man let out a bitter laugh. Men in suits never came there to thank anyone, he said. They came to arrest people, to interrogate them, to bring trouble down on everyone. They didn't talk to men in suits. Then he walked off and left Kieran standing there with a useless sketch in his hand. On the second day, they went to the soup kitchen at Andrew Square, then a shelter in Dorchester, then the streets around the warehouses where unhoused people pitched temporary tents. In every place, the same story repeated itself. Suspicion, silence, refusal. Kieran began to feel frustration, a sensation so foreign it tasted almost like weakness to a man used to the world bending to his will. "Boss, they're protecting her," Tommy said when they sat in the SUV after another wasted afternoon. "They think we're going to hurt her." Kieran stared out the window, watching a woman push a cart filled with shredded belongings. "She's one of them," he said. "Of course they protect her. To them, we're 2 different worlds." On the 3rd day, they widened the search and hired 3 more men from the organization to cover more ground. They went to Chinatown, Roxbury, even into parks where people slept on stone benches. A young woman, maybe in her early 20s, studied the sketch longer than the others. She said she might have seen her voice unsure. Kieran's heart jumped, and he demanded where and when, but she shook her head. She wasn't sure, and even if she were, she wouldn't tell him. If the woman didn't want to be found, she had her reasons. Then she walked away before Kieran could say anything more. That night, Tommy suggested a different approach, offering a reward, $5,000 to anyone who gave information. Kieran considered it, then shook his head. No, if she was hiding, a reward would make her run farther, and he didn't want her to think he was hunting her. On the 4th day, Kieran decided to try something else. Instead of going where the crowds were, he went to St. Mary's Church, where Father Quinn, a 68-year-old priest with silver hair and kind eyes, was known for helping the unhoused without asking questions about who they were. Kieran found Father Quinn in a small office beside the church, sorting boxes of donated clothing. "Father, I need your help," Kieran said, and his voice wasn't authoritative the way it was when he faced enemies. It carried something closer to a plea. Father Quinn looked at Kieran, then at the sketch. "Moretti," he said, "I know who you are. Everyone here does." His tone was calm, without judgment. I'm not here to cause trouble for her, Kieran said. She saved my son. I just want to thank her and make sure she's okay. She was hurt saving Leo. The words came out truer than anything he'd said in years. Father Quinn was quiet for a long time, his eyes holding Kieran's as if he were trying to read a soul. There's a woman I treated 3 days ago, he said at last. Burned hands, cracked ribs, a cut on her forehead. She didn't want to give her name. But when I asked about the fire, she cried and said, "Is the baby okay?" Kieran tightened his grip on the sketch. "Where is she?" he said. "Please, Father." Father Quinn stood and walked to the window. "The Miller building, in the warehouse district," he said. "She comes here every evening to change her bandages. But Moretti, if you show up with a group of men in suits, she'll disappear. People on the street have powerful survival instincts. They know when to run." Kieran nodded. "What should I do?" Father Quinn turned back. "Go alone," he said. "No suits, no bodyguards, no gun. Go like a father trying to thank the woman who saved his child. Go with respect, not power." That afternoon, when Tommy offered to come with him, Kieran shook his head. "This time, I'm going alone." Tommy frowned and warned him it was a dangerous area. That without backup. Kieran gave a thin smile. "If a homeless woman could run into a burning building for my son," he said, "then I can risk walking into a dangerous neighborhood to find her." Sunset spilled over the Miller building in shades of orange mixed with purple, staining the old brick walls the color of tarnished bronze. Kieran Moretti parked 2 blocks away and walked the rest of the distance. Empty-handed, no suit, just a long-sleeved shirt rolled up to his elbows and a pair of jeans, trying to look as unthreatening as possible. He wasn't sure she was here, wasn't sure Father Quinn was right, but this was the only lead he'd had after 4 days of desperation. When he turned into the alley beside the building, he saw her, sitting on a cracked concrete step, body drawn inward, arms wrapped around her knees, her pale face tilted down toward the ground. Leah Bennett looked far worse than the blurred image from the footage. Her hair was caked with dust, her scrubs torn and filthy, and more importantly, the makeshift bandage on her forehead had yellowed, a clear sign of infection. The way she leaned slightly to her left told him her right ribs were still in pain. Kieran approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice gentle, stripped of its usual authority. "I don't mean to bother you, but I'm looking for someone. Are you the one who pulled a little boy out of the fire 4 days ago?" Leah flinched, her head snapping up, eyes wide. Immediately, she recognized something in Kieran. Not his face, but the way he carried himself. The quiet weight of money and power clinging to him like an aura. She stood up too fast, dizziness hitting her, one hand bracing against the wall. "I didn't do anything wrong. Is the baby okay?" Her voice was rough, defensive. Kieran raised both hands in a peaceful gesture. "He's okay, because of you. I'm Kieran Moretti, Leo's father, the boy you saved." Leah stared at him, suspicion filling her eyes, her body already angled toward an escape route. She'd lived on the streets long enough to know that wealthy men didn't seek out homeless women just to say thank you. "He's okay. That's enough. I have to go." She turned away, but the first step sent a sharp pain through her, a groan slipping out as she clutched her ribs. Kieran moved closer, not touching her but close enough to block her path. "You're hurt. The wound on your forehead is infected, and your ribs, I'm guessing they're cracked, haven't been treated properly." Leah looked at him skeptically. "Are you a doctor?" "No, but I know what injuries look like." "You need a doctor, antibiotics, real rest," Kieran said, meeting her eyes. "Please, give me a few minutes. I've been looking for you for 4 days." There was something in his voice, an honesty Leah hadn't expected, that made her hesitate. "Why? Why are you looking for me?" "Because you saved my son. You ran into a burning building while everyone else was running out. You shielded Leo with your body when the debris came down. I owe you my child's life," Kieran said, his voice cracking slightly at the end. "And from what I can see, you paid a heavy price for that courage." Leah shook her head, stepping back. "I just did what anyone would do." "No," Kieran said firmly. "There were 20 people there. You were the only one who ran in. That's not what anyone does. That's what a hero does." Leah gave a bitter, humorless laugh. "Heroes don't sleep on the street. Heroes don't lose everything and turn into a burden on society. A hero is someone who does the right thing when no one else dares." "Circumstances don't define who you are," Kieran replied. He paused, then softened his tone. What's your name? Leah hesitated, then sighed. Leah Bennett. Leah? Kieran repeated, as if committing it to memory. What did you do before you ended up here? The question should have felt intrusive, but the way he asked it, without judgment, made the answer spill out. I was a nurse. Pediatrics. At Boston Medical Center, she said hoarsely, tears threatening to surface. Until my mother developed early-onset Alzheimer's. She was only 54. I quit to care for her full-time. The medical bills piled up. Assisted living, medications, specialists. I burned through my savings, my credit cards, everything. Then she died 5 months ago. She left behind debts I couldn't pay. They took the apartment. My license expired because I couldn't afford to renew it. And now, she gestured weakly at herself, her voice breaking. Now this is who I am. Kieran stayed silent, letting the pause honor her pain. Then he spoke, slowly, carefully. Leah, I have a proposal. Not charity, and not because I pity you, because I need you. Leah looked at him, suspicion returning. You need me? You don't know anything about me. I know the most important thing, he said. I know you ran into fire to save my son. I know you checked Leo's vital signs before you treated your own wounds. I know you have a protective instinct, and that's exactly what Leo needs. Kieran stepped closer. Since the fire, Leo's had nightmares every night. He's afraid of fire, afraid of losing me, afraid of losing anyone. His mother died 2 years ago in an accident. He's already been through trauma, and the fire made it worse. I need someone who understands trauma, someone experienced with children, someone Leo trusts. And he told me, Daddy, find the angel sister. I need her. Leah swallowed, shaken but still afraid. What do you want from me? I want to hire you, to take care of Leo, not as a servant, but as someone who can help him work through his fear. You were a pediatric nurse. You know how to handle childhood trauma. And more than that, you've proven you're willing to protect him with your life, Kieran said. He paused, locking eyes with her. The job comes with a salary of $60,000 a year, housing in my home, health insurance, and I'll help you reinstate your license. This isn't charity. It's a real job because I truly need you. Leah shook her head, stepping back. You don't understand. I'm homeless. I have nothing. Why would you trust me? Because you did what no one else did. Because when you were inside that burning building, you didn't think about yourself. You only thought about Leo. That's the kind of person I want around my son, Kieran said, his voice steady. Leah, I'm not saving you. I'm asking for your help. There's a difference. Leah stood there, tears running down her dirt-streaked cheeks. Part of her wanted to run, to refuse, to cling to the last scraps of dignity by not accepting help from a wealthy stranger. But another part, the exhausted, aching, desperate part, whispered that the boy needed her, and she needed this. I'll try, Leah finally whispered. 1 month. If I'm not right for it, I'll leave. Kieran let out a breath, almost smiling. 1 month. Thank you, Leah. And for the first time in many months, Leah Bennett felt a small, fragile spark of hope flicker in the darkness. The next morning, just as dawn began to show itself over the weathered buildings of South Boston, a glossy black SUV pulled up in front of the Miller building. Tommy O'Brien stepped out, his face serious, but his eyes held none of the hostility Leah had learned to expect from people with money. Bennett? He called softly, and Leah, awake since 5 o'clock from worry and pain, came out of the shadows. Brooklyn had helped her wash her face with bottled water the night before and smooth her hair as best she could, but Leah still knew exactly how she looked, and it was bad. Ready? Tommy asked, not judging her, just practical. Leah nodded and hugged the torn tote bag that held everything she owned, an old sweater, her mother's stethoscope, and the only family photo she had left. Tommy opened the car door for her, and for the first time in months, Leah sat on soft leather, a feeling so unfamiliar she didn't dare lean back. During the 20-minute drive, Leah stared out the window and watched the city shift from hard streets to cleaner ones, with more trees, and then finally to Beacon Hill, where old red brick houses stood close together like precious stones. Tommy turned onto a narrow street and stopped at a tall iron gate, guarded by 2 men in black suits. They nodded when they saw Tommy, and the gate swung open, revealing a stone-paved drive leading to a 3-story mansion, so magnificent. Leah thought she had to be dreaming. This is home, Tommy said simply as he parked at the front entrance. Leah stepped out, still barefoot because she had no shoes, and the cold stone under her feet made her flinch. She looked up at the building, the carved wooden doors, the patterned glass windows, the perfectly tended flower pots. This wasn't just a house, it was a palace. Tommy led her inside, and the door was opened by an older man with neatly combed silver hair, dressed in a crisp black suit, the kind of butler Leah had only ever seen in old films. "This is Angelo," Tommy said. "He runs the house, and he'll help you get used to everything." Angelo dipped his head, his voice carrying a hint of Italian. "Welcome, Miss Bennett. We've been expecting you." His tone was warm, with no trace of contempt, even though Leah knew she looked like a beggar. The moment she stepped into the main foyer, Leah almost forgot to breathe. White marble floors gleamed, reflecting light from a crystal chandelier high above. A dark wooden spiral staircase rose to the upper level, its railing carved with delicate detail. Artwork lined the walls, not copies but original pieces that looked more expensive than the entire weight of debt Leah had carried. "Your room is on the second floor, next to Leo's," Angelo said, starting up the stairs. Leah followed, each bare step leaving a faint mark on the spotless stone, and guilt crawled up her throat because she felt like she was dirtying something sacred. The second floor opened into a long hallway covered in deep green carpet, closed wooden doors on either side. Angelo stopped at one and opened it. "This is your room." Leah stepped inside and couldn't believe what she was seeing. This wasn't a room, it was a suite. A wide bedroom with a queen-size bed, dressed in soft white linens, a large wooden wardrobe, a desk by the window looking out over the back garden. Another door led to a private bathroom where a deep white porcelain tub sat beside a window, with a rainfall showerhead and thick towels folded in perfect stacks. "If you need anything, press this bell," Angelo said, pointing to a button on the wall. "Breakfast is at 8. Leo usually wakes at 7:30. Then Angelo left, closing the door and leaving Leah alone. She stood in the middle of the suite, clutching her torn tote bag, staring around with the sharp, aching feeling that she didn't belong here. This place was larger than the studio apartment she used to own. The bed looked softer than anything she'd slept on in months. And the bathtub, Leah walked into the bathroom and sank to her knees beside the tub, hands trembling as she turned the faucet. Hot water poured out, steam rose. The air filled with the clean, expensive scent of soap from a bottle of luxury bath oil placed neatly nearby. Leah watched the tub fill, and suddenly everything inside her cracked open. She slid down onto the cold floor, pulled her knees to her chest, and cried. She cried because she hadn't had a hot bath in 3 months. She cried because of the brutal contrast between where she'd been and where she was now. She cried for her mother, who had once told her, "You deserve good things, Leah." She cried for everything she'd lost, and was now being handed back. Not as charity, but as a chance. 20 minutes later, after Leah had bathed and dressed in clean clothes, Angelo had left for her, simple jeans and a sweater that fit as if it had been tailored. She heard a gentle knock at the door. "Come in," Leah said, her voice still rough after crying. The door opened, and Leo Moretti walked in with his stuffed bear in his arms, his eyes going wide when he saw Leah. "You!" he shouted, pure astonished joy in his voice, and he ran across the room. Leo slammed into Leah's arms with surprising force for a 5-year-old, wrapping both arms around her waist as if he believed she'd disappear the moment he let go. "You came back. Daddy said you would come, but I didn't dare believe it. I thought I was dreaming." "But you're really here!" Leo tumbled the words out, his face pressed into Leah's shoulder, his small body trembling with emotion. Leah knelt down and held him, one hand smoothing his soft hair, her heart dissolving. "Are you okay, sweetheart? Does anything still hurt?" Leo pulled back and looked up at her with clear blue eyes. "I'm okay. But you? You got hurt saving me." His tiny hand pointed at the bandage on Leah's forehead. "I'm sorry." "No," Leah said firmly, taking his small hand in hers. "Never say you're sorry. Saving you was the most right thing I've ever done." Leo smiled, the purest smile Leah had ever seen. "You'll stay, right? You promise?" Leah looked into those hopeful eyes, and even though she wasn't sure about the future, about herself, or about this place, she nodded. "I'll stay, Leo. I promise." After Leo let Angelo lead him downstairs for breakfast, with the promise that Leah would be down soon, Kieran stood in her doorway, his face more severe than it had been the afternoon before. "Leah, when you're ready, I want to talk in my office." We need to go over the job details. His voice slipped back into a business tone, no longer gentle the way it had been when he'd found her at the Miller building. Leah nodded, her stomach tightening with sudden nerves, and 10 minutes later she went down to the first floor, following Angelo's directions to a dark wooden door at the end of the hall. She knocked softly, and Kieran's voice came from inside. "Come in." Kieran Moretti's office didn't look like a bright, modern workspace. It was a sanctuary of old power, with dark wood-paneled walls, towering bookcases filled with leather-bound volumes, a massive walnut desk, and behind it, Kieran seated in a black leather chair, wearing a perfect charcoal gray suit, every line of him radiating authority. This was Kieran Moretti in his own world, not the man who'd walked into a rough neighborhood to find her. "Sit," Kieran said, pointing to the chair across from the desk. Leah sat, back straight, hands neatly folded on her lap, feeling as if she were in the most important job interview of her life. Kieran slid a stack of papers across the desk. "This is the contract, $60,000 a year, paid monthly. Room and board included. Full medical insurance, including dental and vision. I'll also cover any fees you need to renew your nursing license, if you want." Leah looked down at the numbers, unable to believe them. $60,000. A year ago she'd made $45,000, and that had been enough to live on. This number was a lifeline. "This is too much," she whispered. "No," Kieran said firmly. "This is what the work is worth. Leo needs more than a babysitter. He needs someone who understands trauma, someone with medical skill, someone willing to protect him. You've proven you're that person." Leah nodded slowly, but there was something in the air, an unspoken tension, that made her feel there was more here than what the contract said. Kieran leaned back, his eyes locking on hers with a seriousness that chilled her. "But before you sign, you need to know the truth about this house, about me, about what you're walking into." Leah swallowed, her heart speeding up. "What truth?" "I'm not a normal businessman, Leah. My work isn't entirely legal. I run an organization some people call a crime family. The Moretti family has been in Boston for 3 generations. We control certain activities the law doesn't approve of." Kieran's voice stayed calm. No excuses, no apologies, just the bare truth. Leah felt the blood drain from her face. A crime family, the Mafia, words she'd only ever heard in movies. And now she was sitting across from a real boss. "I've tried to keep Leo separate from that world," Kieran continued. "He doesn't know the details of what I do, and I want it to stay that way for as long as possible. But this house has armed security, cameras everywhere, people coming and going that you shouldn't question. Sometimes there'll be meetings, and you'll need to make sure Leo is far away from them." He paused, his voice dropping lower. "And sometimes there's danger. My enemies might see Leo as a target. That's why he needs someone who doesn't just care for him, but protects him. Someone like you." Leah sat there, her mind spinning. Mafia, danger, enemies. These words weren't supposed to exist in an ordinary person's life. Part of her wanted to stand up and run, to go back to the streets where at least she understood what the danger looked like. But then she remembered Leo, those clear blue eyes, the smile he'd given her, the way he'd held on as if she were the only thing keeping him from being swept away. "If you want to leave, I understand," Kieran said, catching her hesitation. "I won't stop you. I can give you money to start over somewhere else, somewhere safer." Leah shook her head slowly, her voice trembling but steady. "Leo needs me." "He does," Kieran said with a nod, "but you also need safety." "I've lived on the street for 3 months," Leah said, meeting Kieran's eyes. "I faced danger every night. Drunks, robbers, cops who wanted me gone. At least here, the danger has walls and guards." She stopped, drawing in a deep breath. "I'm here for Leo. Your work, what you do, I don't want to know. As long as you keep him separate from it, as long as he's safe, I'll do my job." Kieran studied her for a long moment, and in those dark brown eyes Leah saw something she hadn't expected. Respect. "You're braver than I thought," he said quietly. "Or more reckless," she replied, a bitter flicker of a smile crossing her face. Kieran stood, stepped out from behind the desk, and stopped at the window that looked out over the garden where security guards were on patrol. "There's one more rule, Leah. Never let Leo out of your sight when you're outside the house. Never tell anyone about my work or the people who come here. And if there's anything at all that feels wrong, call Tommy immediately." He turned back, his voice softer. "I can't lose anyone else. Not Leo. And—" He stopped, leaving the sentence unfinished, the unspoken words hanging between them. Leah felt something shift in the room, a current running through the air when their eyes met. This wasn't only an employer and an employee. It was something else, a connection they both felt but didn't dare name. "I'll protect him," Leah said, breaking the silence. "With my life if I have to." "I know," Kieran said, and for the first time he smiled for real, small but sincere. "That's why I chose you." On the first day, Dr. Paige Rourke arrived in the afternoon, with a black leather case packed with medical instruments. She was a 55-year-old woman with gray hair pulled back neatly, and the sharp eyes of someone who'd seen far too many wounds in her career. She didn't ask where Leah had been living, or why she had these injuries. She simply did her work in silence, with absolute professionalism. She said the cut on Leah's forehead was mildly infected, but thankfully it hadn't spread, and her right ribs were cracked, not fully broken, and would heal in 6 weeks if she rested properly, and the burns on her hands and feet would need fresh bandages every day. Dr. Rourke spoke while she stitched the gash on Leah's forehead with small, precise sutures. She told Leah she'd been a nurse, hadn't she? That she could tell by the way Leah had managed the initial wound care. Not bad for someone with no equipment. There was respect in her voice, and Leah felt warmed by it. After Dr. Rourke left, leaving behind a bag full of antibiotics, pain medication, and sterile dressings, Leah went back to the bathroom for the second time that day. This time she soaked in hot water and let the heat sink into every aching muscle. The scent of lavender oil spread through the bath, and in that complete quiet, Leah let her tears fall freely. She cried for everything she'd lost, for her mother not being there to see her pulled back from the edge, for the shame of needing help, and at the same time for the overwhelming relief of knowing she didn't have to sleep on cold concrete anymore. On the second day, Leah began doing the real work. She picked Leo up from school and listened to him talk about his lessons, his friends, the small, bright world of a 5-year-old child. They sat together on the rug in the playroom, surrounded by toys Leo rarely touched, and Leah helped him with his homework, drawing pictures, learning letters, counting numbers. Leo asked if she used to teach kids. Leah smiled and told him she hadn't been a teacher, but she'd taken care of many babies in the hospital, and then she brushed his hair and said he was the most special baby of all. Leo grinned, and Leah felt a part of her heart, the part that had been frozen for months, begin to melt. On the third night, Leah woke at 2 o'clock in the morning, to the sound of crying from Leo's room. She ran over and found him sitting bolt upright in bed, drenched in sweat, eyes wide but not truly awake. He was screaming about fire, that the fire would take her, that it shouldn't be allowed to take her. His hands flailing in the air, Leah sat on the bed and drew him gently into her arms, not too tight, not enough to trap him. She told him there was no fire, that she was right there, that he was safe. But Leo kept trembling and crying, and Leah began to sing. A lullaby her mother used to sing when Leah was a child. Soft melody, soothing words. Her voice wasn't beautiful, but it was full of love. And little by little Leo calmed down, his breathing slowing, his small body relaxing in her arms. Leah kept singing until he fell asleep again, still holding him, not daring to let go. What she didn't know was that Kieran was standing outside the door, his hand resting lightly on the knob but not turning it. He'd been about to come in when he heard Leo crying, but he stopped when he heard Leah's voice. He stood there in the dark, listening to the lullaby, listening to the way she handled his child with a gentleness he'd never been able to give, and he felt something shift inside his chest. On the fourth evening, something miraculous happened. Angelo prepared dinner as usual, but this time, instead of bringing it up to Kieran the way Kieran normally demanded, Leah asked if Leo could have dinner with his father, because he wanted to tell Daddy about the drawing that got him a perfect 10 today. Angelo looked confused and said the boss usually ate alone in his study, but Leah insisted that Leo was a child, and he needed to eat dinner with his family. And so, for the first time in 2 years, Angelo stared in disbelief as he saw Kieran Moretti sitting at the long dining table, with Leo on his left and Leah on his right. The meal began in silence, awkward and stiff. But then Leo started talking. He told Daddy he'd drawn a picture about fire that day, but it wasn't bad fire, because Leah had told him fire could be good, like a campfire, or birthday candles, and he'd even drawn Leah in the picture, blowing out candles. Kieran looked across the table at Leah, his eyes full of unspoken questions, asking if she was teaching Leo to face his fear. Leah nodded slightly and said he couldn't be afraid of fire his whole life. He needed to learn the difference between real danger and safety. Kieran didn't speak, but his gaze said everything. Gratitude, surprise, and something deeper he wasn't ready to name. On the 6th night, while they played a simple board game on the living room rug, Leo repeated a silly joke a classmate had told him, and he laughed. Not a forced sound, but real laughter, clear and bright, echoing through the big house that normally held only silence. Angelo, standing at the doorway with a tray of tea, stopped short, eyes wide. Kieran, coming down the stairs, froze halfway, his hand tightening around the banister. They hadn't heard Leo laugh like that since before the fire, maybe even since before his mother died. And the person who'd brought that laughter back, the person who'd brought light to the child, was the woman who'd once had nothing, now sitting on the floor and laughing with Leo as if she'd belonged there all along. The call came in at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday morning, just as Leah was preparing lunch in the kitchen with Angelo. The cell phone Kieran had given her rang, and the screen lit up with the name Riverside Elementary School. Leah answered, her heart speeding up with an instinctive sense that something was wrong. "Miss Bennett, this is Mrs. Morrison, principal of Riverside. We need you to come pick Leo up immediately. He's extremely distressed, and we haven't been able to calm him down," the woman said, her voice controlled but strained. "What happened?" Leah asked, already reaching for the car keys Kieran had handed her the day before. A simple silver sedan that didn't draw attention. "We had a routine fire drill this morning. When the alarm went off, Leo had a severe panic attack. He cried, couldn't regulate his breathing, and refused to leave the classroom. The teacher had to carry him out. He's in the nurse's office now, still shaking and not responding to anyone." Leah was in the car before Mrs. Morrison finished her sentence. She drove through the streets of Boston fast enough to arrive quickly, but not so fast that she risked an accident, her hands tight on the steering wheel, blaming herself. She should have anticipated this. Fire drills were standard practice in schools, but for a child who'd recently survived a real fire, the alarm sound, the simulated smoke, the evacuation procedures were all powerful triggers for post-traumatic stress. She should have warned the school, should have prepared Leo, but she hadn't. 15 minutes later, Leah stepped into the school's medical office, and her heart broke at the sight of him. Leo sat curled in on a small chair, arms wrapped tightly around his knees, his face buried between his legs, his body still trembling in waves. The school nurse stood nearby, helpless. "Leo," Leah said softly, kneeling in front of him. Immediately, Leo lifted his head, eyes red and swollen with tears, and threw himself into her arms. "You're here," he sobbed, his voice breaking. I thought... He couldn't finish the sentence, only clung to her neck and cried, "You're safe. I'm here," Leah whispered, holding him close, one hand gently rubbing his back, guiding his breathing. "Let's go home." On the drive back, Leah didn't ask questions and didn't push him to talk. From her years as a pediatric nurse, she knew children needed time to process trauma, and forcing words too soon only made things worse. Instead, she turned on soft music on the radio, let Leo rest his head against the window, and drove back to the house in a silence that felt supportive rather than empty. When they arrived, instead of taking Leo upstairs to his bedroom, Leah led him into the kitchen. Angelo looked at them with concern, but she shook her head slightly, signaling for space. Leah sat at the kitchen table, guided Leo into the chair beside her, and from a drawer she took out a simple white candle and a lighter. Leo recoiled at the sight. "No, no fire," he said, panic sharp in his voice. "Sweetheart, I'm not going to scare you. I just want to show you something," Leah said gently, placing the candle on a ceramic plate. "Fire is part of life. We use it to cook, to keep warm, to see in the dark, and most importantly, we can control it." Leo shook his head hard, but he couldn't look away. Leah lit the candle, the flame flaring softly, small and steady. "Look," she said, bringing her hand close without touching it. "It's hot, right? But I know how to be near it without getting hurt. And more than that, I can put it out whenever I want." She blew lightly, and the flame vanished, a thin ribbon of smoke rising. "See? I control it." Leo watched, fear still in his eyes, but curiosity beginning to surface. "Now I'll light it again, and you'll be the one to put it out. You'll see you're stronger than this fire." Leah lit the candle again. "You don't have to do it if you're not ready. I'll stay right here and hold your hand. Leo hesitated, then very slowly reached out his small hand, Leah closing her fingers around it. Together, they moved close enough to feel the warmth without danger. Now blow gently. You're in control, Leah encouraged. Leo took a deep, shaky breath and blew. The flame flickered but didn't go out. A little stronger, sweetheart. You can do this. This time, Leo blew harder, and the flame died. He stared at the smoking wick, then up at Leah, his eyes wide. I did it. You did. You controlled it. Fire's only scary when it's out of control. When you understand it, you're stronger than it, Leah said, smiling as she wiped the tears still clinging to his cheeks. They repeated the exercise 3 more times, each one building Leo's confidence, until at the last round he lit the candle himself, with only minimal help from Leah, and blew it out on his own. But when the flame disappeared for the final time, Leo broke down again. This time it wasn't fear, it was release. I was scared the fire would take you like it almost took me, he cried. I was scared you wouldn't come back like my mom didn't. I don't want to lose you. His voice shook as the deepest fear finally surfaced. Leah pulled him into her arms, tears spilling freely down her own face. I'm not going anywhere, Leo. I promise you. Fire can't take me. And I won't let anything separate me from you. What Leah didn't know was that Kieran was standing in the kitchen doorway, having come home early after Mrs. Morrison called to tell him about the incident at school. He'd been about to step in, but stopped when he saw Leah with the candle. He stood there, watching the way she handled Leo's fear, not by avoiding it or lying that everything would be fine, but by teaching him to face it, understand it, and master it. He watched his son, the child who'd screamed through nightmares every night, now blow out a candle with quiet pride on his face. And he watched Leah, the woman who'd once had nothing, give Leo something he couldn't buy with all his money and power, a sense of safety. Kieran Moretti, the man who'd built an empire on strength and fear, felt something he'd believed had died with Elena. Hope. Hope that his son would be all right. Hope that this house could become a home again, not just a fortress. And the most dangerous hope of all, the one he didn't dare admit even to himself, that Leah Bennett hadn't come here only to save Leo, but that maybe, just maybe, she was saving him too. The second month in the Moretti mansion began with a kind of comfort Leah hadn't expected. Leo wasn't having nightmares as often anymore, only once or twice a week instead of every night. He'd gone back to school, and when the next fire drill came, he got through it without panicking, even though he still gripped his teacher's hand tightly. Leah started to feel that this wasn't just a temporary job. It was a place she could belong, at least in some small way. She'd grown used to Angelo, to the way Tommy showed up each morning to report to Kieran, to the men in black suits who patrolled the property. She'd learned how not to ask, not to stare too long, to focus on Leo and let the rest of the Moretti world exist at the edges of her vision. But on a Thursday night, in the 6th week since she arrived, everything changed. Leah woke at 1:30 in the morning, thirsty. The water bottle on her nightstand was empty, and she decided to go downstairs for more, instead of pressing the bell to call Angelo the way he'd instructed. She didn't want to bother anyone in the middle of the night over something so small. Leah slipped a thin robe over her pajamas and stepped out of her room, feeling the plush carpet against her soles, her steps soundless. The second-floor hallway was dark, lit only by the faint glow of a night lamp in the corner, and she went down the spiral staircase carefully, one hand on the railing. When she reached the first floor, she meant to turn left toward the kitchen, but she stopped when she heard voices. They were coming from Kieran's study. The door was cracked open just a sliver, a slice of light spilling into the dark hallway. Leah knew she shouldn't be curious. Kieran had made it clear, don't ask about business, don't get involved. But there was something in his voice, a tone she'd never heard from him, that pulled her closer instead of sending her to the kitchen. She moved to the gap in the door, stayed in the shadows, and looked inside. The sight nearly stopped her heart. A man was kneeling in the middle of the room, with his hands bound behind his back, his face swollen, blood running from his mouth. Tommy O'Brien stood behind him, a gun hanging loose in his hand, but the threat was as real as if it were pressed to the man's head. And Kieran, the Kieran Moretti Leah had seen gentle with Leo, polite with her, was standing in front of the kneeling man, with a face stripped of emotion. One last time, Vincent, he said. Where's the money? Kieran's voice was ice, each word falling with the weight of a death sentence. Vincent, the man on his knees, sobbed openly. He said he'd told Moretti already. He didn't have it. His son needed heart surgery. He'd used everything to pay the hospital. He begged for more time. Kieran didn't answer. He only gave Tommy a small nod. Tommy stepped forward and drove the butt of his gun into Vincent's back. Vincent screamed and collapsed face down onto the floor. "You have 2 children," Kieran said, his tone unchanged, as if he were discussing the weather. "The older one, Sarah, 14 years old, goes to St. Anne's. The younger one, Michael, 8 years old, just had surgery. They're both lovely. It would be a shame if they had to grow up without a father." It wasn't a direct threat to the children, but the meaning was unmistakable. If Vincent didn't pay, he would disappear, and his children would be left fatherless. Or worse, his family wouldn't be safe at all. Vincent wailed that he would pay. 1 month, he begged. Give him 1 month. He'd borrow, he'd sell his house, he'd sell everything. Kieran was silent for a long moment, then he said 2 weeks. If there was no money after 2 weeks, Tommy would pay his family a visit, and next time they wouldn't be there just to talk. He nodded, and 2 other men appeared from the corner of the room, hauling Vincent up and dragging him out through the back. Leah stepped back just in time and hid behind a large pillar, her heart pounding like a war drum. She watched them pass, Vincent still crying, blood dripping onto the pristine marble floor. When they vanished through the door that led down to the garage, Leah heard Kieran's voice from inside the study, telling them to clean it up, that he didn't want Leo seeing blood in the morning. "Yes, boss," Tommy answered, as calm as if he'd been asked to wipe up spilled coffee. Leah didn't wait to hear another word. She turned and went back toward the stairs on the balls of her feet, forgetting all about getting water. She only wanted to return to her room, close the door, and pretend she hadn't seen anything. But when she lay in bed, with the blanket pulled up to her chin, Leah couldn't stop shaking. This was the first time she'd seen, clearly and undeniably, what a crime family really meant. Not polite men in suits. Not gentle Angelo. Not Kieran smiling softly when Leo laughed. Violence, threats, fear. Vincent on his knees, bleeding, begging for his family. Tommy holding a gun the way someone else might hold a pen. Kieran speaking about someone else's children with a terrifying coldness. Leah remembered the way Kieran stroked Leo's hair, the way he'd smiled faintly when he heard Leo laugh, the way his eyes had met hers across the dinner table with something almost warm. Now that image overlapped with Kieran standing over Vincent, his voice as cold as death. This was the real man she was living with. This was the world she'd stepped into. Leah didn't sleep the rest of that night. She stared at the ceiling with wide-open eyes, her mind spinning between the urge to run and her duty to Leo. He needed her, but he was also the son of a man who could order harm done to others without hesitation. When dawn finally began to pale the windows, Leah had made her decision. She would stay for Leo, but from that moment on, she would never forget the true nature of Kieran Moretti, and she would keep her distance, protecting her heart from a man who could be both gentle and ruthless, in a way that was frightening to witness. 3 days after that night, Leah kept her distance from Kieran in a subtle, deliberate way. She wasn't a good actress, but for Leo, she tried. Every morning when Kieran came down for breakfast, she greeted him politely, but she didn't let her eyes meet his for too long. Every evening when Leo told stories about his day, she smiled and nodded, but she sat a little farther from Kieran than she had before. She said "yes, sir," instead of using his name, building an invisible wall between them. Kieran noticed. He wasn't stupid. He saw the way she retreated, the way her gaze slid away, the way she found reasons to leave the room whenever they were alone. He didn't ask, and he didn't confront her, because asking would mean admitting there was something between them that needed to be confronted, and neither of them was ready to admit it. But Leo sensed it. At Saturday dinner, he asked, "Why isn't Leah sitting next to Daddy anymore? You always sat there before." Leah forced a smile. "I think this spot has better light for cutting your food, sweetheart." Leo looked at her like he didn't believe a word of it, but he didn't press, and the air grew heavy with everything that wasn't being said. On Tuesday night, the 3rd week after the incident, Leah couldn't sleep again. She'd had chamomile tea, she'd tried counting sheep, she'd even read a bland, forgettable book, but her mind wouldn't quiet down. The image of Vincent on his knees, Kieran's voice turned to ice, and the brutal contrast between the man who threatened another man's family and the father who kissed Leo's forehead every night kept looping in her head. At 2 a.m, Leah gave up on trying to sleep. She put on a jacket and decided to go down to the library to find another book, maybe something duller that might finally drag her under. but when she passed Kieran's office, she saw a thin line of light glowing beneath the door. Her heart jumped, the memory of that night rushing back. But this time there was no begging, no threats, only silence. Leah knew she should keep walking, but curiosity and a vague, uneasy worry made her stop. She knocked softly. "Come in," Kieran's voice said, tired, without the usual business edge. Leah pushed the door open, stepped inside, and froze at the sight of him. Kieran was seated by the window, not behind his desk, wearing slacks and a shirt with his cravat undone, a glass of whiskey in his hand as he stared out into the dark garden. He looked exhausted, shoulders slumped, his face marked with lines that daylight usually hid. "You can't sleep either?" he asked, not turning to look at her. Yeah. Leah hesitated in the doorway. "I was going to the library." Kieran nodded, then stood and went to the liquor cabinet, taking out a second glass. "Whiskey helps me more than books. Do you want some?" Leah knew she should refuse, should leave, should keep the distance she'd worked so hard to create. But there was something in Kieran's posture, a loneliness she recognized because she'd lived inside it too, that pulled her forward. She stepped into the room and closed the door. "Just a little," she said. Kieran poured the whiskey and handed her the glass, their fingers brushing for a split second, and they both jerked back as if shocked. They sat in two leather chairs facing each other by the window, a safe distance between them, and drank in silence. The whiskey burned down Leah's throat, heat spreading through her chest into her stomach, a sensation she wasn't used to. "You've been avoiding me," Kieran said at last, not accusing, only stating what was true. Leah tightened her grip on the glass. "I'm not avoiding you. I'm just focused on Leo." "You're not very good at lying," he said, turning to look at her for the first time, his dark brown eyes steady in the shadows. "You saw something, heard something, and now you're afraid of me." Leah wanted to deny it, but the lies wouldn't come. "I'm not afraid of you," she said slowly. "I'm afraid of your world. There's a difference." Kieran nodded and took a long drink. "There's no difference. My world is part of me. You can't separate it." He paused, staring out the window again. "Elena couldn't either. My wife. She loved me. Or she thought she did. Until she realized who I really was. And fear kills love faster than anything else." It was the first time Kieran had spoken about Elena to Leah beyond the brief line. His mother died 2 years ago. Leah stayed still, sensing he needed to talk, and she needed to listen. "Elena died because of me," Kieran continued, his voice hollow. "The Russo family, our rivals, killed her to pay me back for killing Carlo Russo's brother in a clash. They put a bomb under her car. Leo was home with a nanny that day. If he hadn't been, he would have died too." He finished his glass, gripping it so hard his knuckles went white. "I promised myself I wouldn't let anyone else get close to me, close to Leo, because being close to me means danger. And then you showed up." Leah felt her heart tighten. "What are you saying?" Kieran turned to her, his eyes filled with something Leah didn't dare name. "I'm saying that for the past 3 months, I've been trying to keep my distance from you. I've been trying to see you as only an employee, only Leo's caregiver. But every time you smile, every time you hold Leo, every time you sit across from me at the table, I feel myself failing, and that scares me more than any enemy." Leah stood abruptly, the air in the room suddenly too heavy, too hot. "This can't happen. You're my employer. I'm here for Leo." "I know," Kieran said, standing too, stepping closer, too close. "But tell me you don't feel it too. Tell me that when our eyes meet across the table, you don't feel anything. Tell me, and I won't ever bring this up again." Leah couldn't speak, because if she did, it would be a lie, and she'd told herself enough lies already. Kieran stood in front of her now, only a step away, his gaze dropping to her lips and lifting back to her eyes. "Leah." His voice was rough, thick with longing. Then he leaned down, and their mouths almost met, their breath mixing, the world shrinking until there was only this moment. But just before the last inch disappeared, Leah pressed a hand to his chest and pushed him back, gently. "This can't happen," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I saw you that night, with Vincent, your voice when you threatened his children. And I know you do those things because of the world you live in, but I can't. I can't love a man when half of me is afraid." Kieran stepped back, pain cutting across his face. "I understand," he said, his voice turning cold again, the walls going up. "I'm sorry I crossed a line." Leah shook her head, tears threatening to spill. "Don't apologize. Just let me be here for Leo. Don't make this harder than it already is." Then she turned away and left the room before she lost control, before she could turn back and do the thing she knew would destroy her. Kieran stood alone in the dark office, the whiskey glass slipping from his hand and shattering on the floor, but he didn't move. For the first time since Elena died, he'd let someone get close. And for the first time, he understood there were things even power and money couldn't buy. The heart of a woman who could see the devil he truly was. On Friday afternoon, 2 days after that night in the study, Leah received a text from Brooklyn Hayes, the only friend she still had from her time on the street. She asked if Leah was free, saying she wanted to see her, that she missed her so much. Leah read it and felt her heart warm with the memory of Brooke, the one who'd shared her last piece of bread when Leah was starving, the one who'd held Leah's things when she went out to look for work. Leah knocked on Kieran's study door, the first time she'd done it since that night, her voice careful, professional. She apologized for interrupting, and said a friend wanted to visit, that the friend knew she was here, and asked if she could invite her. Kieran looked up from his paperwork, and his eyes met Leah's for a single beat before they both looked away, the distance they'd built still there. He told her of course she could, that the house was her home too, and that she only needed to give Tommy the name so security would be informed. His voice was colder than before, and Leah felt the sting of it, but she couldn't complain because it was what she'd asked for. That afternoon, while Leo was down for a nap, the gate buzzer rang, and Leah hurried out to meet Brooke. Her friend looked much cleaner than the last time they'd seen each other. Hair neatly cut, a new jacket on her shoulders, her face no longer as pale and hollow as before. She shouted Leah's name and hugged her hard, telling her she looked like a princess. Leah laughed, the first real laugh she'd had in days, and told Brooke she looked so much better too, asking what had happened. Brooke let herself be led inside, eyes wide at the sight of the mansion foyer, and she blurted out that Leah was living in a palace. Then she told Leah she'd gotten into the rehab program at St. Mary's, that she'd been clean for 2 months, and her voice was proud. Leah hugged her again, genuinely happy for her. They sat in the living room drinking tea Angelo brought out, and Brooke talked about her life slowly settling, about learning to become a hairdresser, about hoping to have a small apartment next year. Leah listened with a smile, and shared stories about Leo and the work, but she didn't mention Kieran or anything about business. An hour passed like a few minutes, and when Brooke had to leave for an evening counseling session, Leah walked her to the gate and made her promise they'd stay in touch more often. But when Brooke stepped outside the iron gate and waited for a bus at the corner, a black sedan rolled up beside her. The door opened, and a large man climbed out, wearing a leather jacket, a scar running down his cheek. He said her name, Brooklyn Hayes, in a low voice that carried threat. Brooke startled and stepped back, asking who he was. He told her it didn't matter who he was. It mattered that he knew who she was. Leah Bennett's friend, the one living in the Moretti house, and he needed information about her. He moved closer, and Brooke felt her heart slam against her ribs. She said she didn't know anything. She was only an old friend. The man smiled, but there was no warmth in it. He told her she was lying. They'd been watching her. They knew she'd entered the rehab program at St. Mary's, and they knew where the funding came from. The community fund, wasn't it? The fund they could make vanish with a single phone call. He paused and let the threat settle. Then he told her she could help them instead. She could tell them about Leah Bennett. Did Moretti care about her? Did she have weaknesses? When did she leave the house? Small details. And Brooke would keep her rehab program, keep her future. Brooke felt sick. She knew exactly what these men were. Living on the street, she'd heard enough stories about the Mafia, about families fighting over territory, about the way they threatened and bought and erased people. She told him she wouldn't betray her friend. Her voice shook, but it came out steadier than she'd expected. The man's brow tightened. He told her to think about it, that they'd be in touch again, and that if she told Moretti or Bennett about this conversation, her rehab program wouldn't just lose funding. She understood him, didn't she? Then he got back into the sedan and drove away, leaving Brooke alone on the sidewalk, trembling. She could stay silent, protect herself, hold on to the chance at recovery she'd fought so long for. Or she could warn Leah, the one who'd always shared what she had when no one else cared, and risk losing everything. Brooke stood there for 5 minutes, her hands shaking as she pulled out her old phone. Then she made her choice. She went back to the mansion gate and pressed the buzzer. This time, Tommy opened it, looking at her with suspicion, asking if she'd forgotten something. Brooke said she needed to see Leah right now, that it was important. Minutes later, Leah ran out, worried, asking what was wrong and why Brooke looked like she'd seen a ghost. Brooke looked around and saw cameras, saw guards, knew they were listening, but there was no other way. She told Leah a man had asked about her, had stopped his car when Brooke left the gate. He knew who Brooke was, knew Leah was living here, and he wanted information. He'd threatened Brooke, but she couldn't let Leah not know. She told Leah someone was watching her and to be careful. Leah felt the blood drain from her face. Tommy was beside her instantly, demanding a description of the man. Right now, and while Brooke described him, Leah looked back toward the mansion, toward the open window of Kieran's study, and she knew he was standing there, hearing every word, and she knew the storm he'd warned about had finally arrived. After Brooke's warning, the Moretti estate turned into a fortress. Tommy doubled the number of guards, new cameras went up on every corner, and Leah wasn't allowed to leave the house alone. Kieran didn't explain much. He only said, "The Russo family is moving. Until we identify the threat, you and Leo stay inside." His voice was strict, leaving no room for argument. And Leah nodded, frightened and furious at the same time, because she'd been dragged deeper into this dangerous world than she'd ever imagined. But in the middle of all that tension, Leo Moretti, 5 years old and innocent of every adult drama, created a moment that would change everything. On Tuesday afternoon, while Leah was helping him with homework, Leo sat on the playroom floor with a box of crayons and a large pad of paper. He drew in silence for 30 minutes, tongue sticking out in concentration, refusing to let Leah see it until he was finished. "Done," Leo announced at last, holding the picture up with a bright grin. Leah looked, and her chest tightened. On the page, drawn in clumsy crayon lines but filled with feeling, were 3 figures: a tall man in a black suit, hair colored in dark brown, a small child in the middle holding a teddy bear, and a woman with brown hair, wearing a light blue dress that looked like scrubs, holding the child's hand. Above the picture, in the uneven handwriting of a first grader, Leo had written, "My family, Daddy, me, Leah." "That's my family, Leah," Leo said proudly. "Daddy, me, and you, we're family." Leah knelt and hugged him, not trusting herself to say much more. "Sweetheart, it's beautiful. I love it so much." But inside, she felt warmth and fear at the same time, because family wasn't something she dared to hope for. Not in this house. Not with Kieran Moretti. "I want to show Daddy," Leo said, grabbing Leah's hand and tugging her down to the first floor. They found Kieran in his office, on the phone with Tommy. But the moment he saw Leo, he ended the call. "Daddy, Daddy, look." Leo ran up and held the drawing out. "I drew our family." Kieran took the picture, his eyes moving across the 3 figures, and Leah saw his jaw tighten, a strong emotion flickering across that usually cold face. "It's beautiful, buddy," Kieran said, his voice a little rough. "Daddy'll hang it in my office. Right, Daddy? We're family? Daddy, me, and Leah?" Leo asked, then looked up at his father with clear blue eyes full of hope. "Can Leah be my new mom? I want a mom to stay with me, and Leah saved me. Leah takes care of me. Leah sings to me when I dream about fire. That's what moms do, right?" Kieran Moretti, the man who'd faced enemies without blinking, the man who'd ordered deaths without hesitation, stood there holding his son's drawing, and couldn't speak. His eyes lifted over Leo's head to Leah, and in that look she saw everything. The grief of losing Elena, the fear that Leo had already endured too much loss, and something deeper she didn't dare name. "Leo, sweetheart," Leah said, kneeling beside him. "I'm your friend, your caregiver. A mom is." But Leo shook his head and clung to Leah. "You do what moms do. You love me. I can feel it. Why can't you be my mom?" And Leah had no answer, because the truth was she loved this child like he was her own, had loved him for a long time without admitting it. Dinner that night passed under a heavy silence. Angelo served pasta, Leo's favorite, but no one ate much. Halfway through, Leo suddenly said, "Mom, Leah, can I have more bread?" Both Kieran and Leah froze and looked at him. Leo looked back, innocent. "Can I call you that? Mom, Leah? Because you're not my real mom, but you're like a mom?" Leah looked at Kieran, waiting for him to stop it, waiting for him to say this wasn't appropriate, wasn't right, was too fast. But Kieran only gave a small nod, his voice rough. If Leah's okay with it. And Leah, tears threatening to spill, nodded. You can call me that, sweetheart. Leo beamed and went back to eating like nothing had happened. But for the two adults, everything had shifted. After Leo was tucked into bed, Leah stood in the hallway, leaning against the wall, exhausted from emotion. She heard footsteps, and Kieran appeared from Leo's room, his eyes finding her in the dim light. We need to talk, he said, and Leah nodded, following him down to the office where every important conversation seemed to happen. Kieran shut the door, turned back, and this time he didn't keep his distance. He needs you. You know that. His voice wasn't cold now. It was heavy with restraint and feeling. He called you Mom, Leah, and you didn't refuse. What does that mean? Leah wrapped her arms around herself, feeling cold even though the room was warm. It means I couldn't hurt him by refusing. It means I love him more than I ever thought I could. And me? Kieran asked, stepping closer. What do you feel for me, Leah? Because I can't keep pretending. I can't keep looking at you across the table, hearing you sing to my son, watching you turn this house into a home, and pretend I don't feel anything. Don't, Leah said, shaking her head, her voice trembling. Don't say these things. You made it clear. Your world is dangerous. Elena died because of it. And now the Russos are watching me, threatening Brooklyn, and everything is getting worse. I know, Kieran said, pain in his voice. I know every minute you're here, you're in danger. I know loving you is the most selfish thing I could do. But Leah, he needs you. And he stopped, his voice breaking. I need you too. I need you in a way I haven't needed anyone since Elena. And that scares me more than any enemy. Leah turned to him, tears falling freely now. You scare me. Your world scares me. I saw you with Vincent, your voice like ice when you threatened his family. And I know that's who you have to be to survive in that world. But I don't know how to love both parts of you. The part that's gentle with Leo, and the part that could kill without blinking. Kieran stood in front of her, not touching her, but close enough that she could feel his warmth. I'm not asking you to love both parts. I'm only asking you not to leave us. Not to leave Leo. Not to leave me. Even if this world is dark, even if I don't deserve you, please don't go. I'm scared, Leah whispered. I know, Kieran said softly, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry I pulled you into this. Sorry I put you in danger. Sorry I loved you when I had no right. But I can't change what I feel. And in that silence, between two people divided by a world and by fear, one thing was clear. They'd crossed the point of no return a long time ago. And whatever came next, neither of them could pretend anymore that their heart didn't belong to the other. On the other side of the city, inside a dark warehouse in East Boston, Carlo Russo sat at the head of a conference table, pieced together from old pallets, his cold eyes fixed on the 6 most loyal men he had. Carlo was 42, with prematurely graying black hair and a long scar that ran from his ear down his neck, a man who lived on revenge. His brother Marco had died in a clash with the Moretti family 3 years earlier, and Carlo had spent those 3 years planning, waiting, searching for weakness. And now, at last, he'd found it. Moretti thinks he's smart, Carlo said, his low voice echoing in the wide space. He keeps his little son quiet, away from business, and he thinks that will protect him. But even the strongest man has a weakness, and Kieran Moretti, the man who killed my brother, now has 2 weaknesses, his son and the woman. One of the men, Vincent, the same man who had fled to the Russos after Moretti threatened his family, spoke up. He said they'd confirmed it, that the woman's name was Leah Bennett, 28 years old, a former nurse, previously homeless. She'd saved Moretti's son from the fire, and now she was living in his house. An inside source said Moretti didn't treat her like an employee alone, that he cared about her. Carlo smiled, a humorless, icy smile. Perfect. Moretti took my brother from me, so I'm going to take what he loves. Not kill them right away. That's too easy. We're going to make him suffer first. Take the son or the woman. Best is both. Make him choose. Then when he's on his knees begging, I'll let him watch his loved ones die, the way I had to watch Marco die. The men nodded, and the plan began to take shape, a plan that would shake Kieran Moretti's world down to its foundation. What Carlo didn't know was that Tommy O'Brien had an informant inside the Russo organization, a man who was tired of endless revenge, and that man called Tommy only 30 minutes after the meeting ended. The next morning, Kieran called an emergency meeting. Leah wasn't invited, but she heard voices through the study door, heard the severity in their tone, and she knew something terrible was happening. When Kieran finally came out, his face tight with strain, he found Leah playing with Leo in the living room. "Leah, I need to talk to you," he said, leaving no room for refusal. They went out to the back balcony where Leo couldn't hear, and Kieran spoke plainly. He told her Russo was planning something, that they knew about her and about Leo, and that Tommy's intelligence said they'd make a move within 2 weeks. He said he'd tripled security. From now on, Leo would be driven and picked up by an armed team. Leah wasn't to leave the house unless Tommy or Kieran went with her, and he was considering sending both of them somewhere safe until things calmed down. Leah felt as if she'd been slapped. She asked what he meant by sending them away, how, and for how long. He said it could be a few months, that he had a safe house in Vermont where Russo couldn't find them, and that Leah and Leo would be protected 24 hours a day. His voice was firm, but his eyes showed pain as he said it. Leah shook her head. She said Leo had only just stabilized. He wasn't having nightmares anymore. He was doing well in school. He had friends, and being taken away suddenly would frighten him more than any threat. Kieran answered sharply that fear was better than death. He said he wouldn't let what happened to Elena happen again to Leah or to Leo. Leah looked him straight in the eyes and told him to end it then, to end it with Russo, to do whatever he had to do so Leo could live normally. Kieran stayed silent for a long moment, then nodded. He said he would, but until then Leah had to follow security rules, with no exceptions. The days that followed turned into a nightmare of surveillance. Every morning when Leah took Leo to school, 2 black SUVs followed behind, packed with men in suits with guns hidden under their jackets. Other mothers stared with a mix of fear and curiosity, and Leo asked why they needed so many cars, calling her mom Leah, and Leah had to lie, telling him Daddy just wanted to make sure they were safe. "Sweetheart," inside the house, every window was covered with thick curtains, cameras watched every corner, and Leah felt as if she were living in a luxurious prison. She couldn't walk in the garden without a guard following behind. She couldn't open her bedroom window to breathe air without being reminded that it wasn't safe. Angelo tried to keep the atmosphere lighter by making favorite foods, but even he looked tense, worn down by the pressure. On Thursday night, at 11 o'clock, Leah was reading in her room when she heard noise outside, running footsteps, voices shouting, then the sound of an engine roaring away. She rushed to the window, pulled the curtain aside just enough to look out, and saw 2 guards at the gate speaking into radios, staring toward a dark sedan speeding away at the end of the road. Tommy appeared out of the shadows, spoke to the guards, then looked up and saw Leah at the window. He shook his head and motioned for her to step back inside. Leah pulled away, her heart stumbling in her chest, and when she turned, she saw Kieran standing in her doorway. "They're surveilling," he said simply, "checking security, looking for weak points. It's a sign they're about to act." Leah wrapped her arms around herself and said she couldn't live like this, and Leo couldn't live like this. Kieran stepped in and closed the door, his voice softer. He said he knew, and he would end it. But if something happened, if they came, he needed Leah to promise one thing. Protect Leo. Run. Don't look back. Just save him. Leah stared at him and saw fear in the eyes of a man who usually feared nothing, and she asked what about him. Kieran said he would do what he had to do to buy them time to get out, and in those words Leah understood he was willing to die to protect them, and that thought frightened her more than any threat from Russo. On Tuesday afternoon, the 13th day after the warning about the Russos, Leah stood outside the parking lot at Riverside Elementary School, waiting for Leo to be dismissed like she did every day. 2 black SUVs sat about 20 feet away, holding 4 of Tommy's men, and Leah knew there were 2 more tucked somewhere around the area, following the protective tactics Kieran had put in place. The sun fell gently. Children poured out with bright laughter, and for a moment Leah almost believed everything would be okay, that maybe the Russos had backed off, that maybe life could return to normal. That was her mistake. Leo came running out, his backpack bouncing. His face lit up when he saw her. "Mom, Leah, I got a 10 on my spelling test," he shouted, and Leah opened her arms, a smile spreading across her mouth. But the instant Leo was about 5 feet from her, a gray van with no license plate burst from the corner, tore into the lot at a crazed speed, and skidded to a stop between Leah and the security SUVs. The sliding door flew open. 3 men in black hoodies jumped out, and before Leah could even process what she was seeing, One of them grabbed Leo by the backpack and yanked him back. "No!" Leah screamed, her survival instinct from 3 months on the street exploding like lightning. She didn't think, didn't hesitate. She just lunged toward the man who was hauling Leo while the child thrashed and screamed. Leah drove her shoulder into his ribs with her full weight, the same technique she'd used to get free from attackers on the street, and the man stumbled, his grip loosening. "Run, Leo! Run to the car!" Leah shouted, shoving him toward the SUV. But a second man blocked the path and seized Leo by the shirt. Leah spun on him, her nails raking across